Welcome to Do What Matters Most. This is episode 12 in the series Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children. When parents adjust their leadership to match their children's ages and stages, they will also need to have two types of knowledge: what healthy development looks like, and the nature of the threats that can adversely affect children. In this episode, learn how to begin the process of adjusting to the circumstances your children ages 6 to 11 are in and turning them into success. Visit mattersmostmedia.org to find more about the podcast and firstanswers.com to find tons of parenting resources.
Hello. I just want to remind you what the context or the purpose is in the program titled Parent Leadership for 21st Century Children. It's designed to show you that what we need now and for the future, in my opinion, based on the research literature and practical experiences in a clinical setting, is a parent leadership that invites parents to know much more about their children, to be able to apply leadership that is adaptive to each individual child, that is adaptive to their age and their stage of development, that adapts according to the threats and conditions in their environment, so that the idea of making adjustments and changes over time gets permanently implanted in our lives, so that we move from one form of stability to another and take our family along with us, so that we do a good job of providing for our children the very best conditions that will help them achieve the important outcomes we want for them and that they want. The title of this episode is related to children 6 through 11 years of age. So the type of parenting we hope for is to hunt for and find the uniqueness in each child, build connections among family members, and create a warm family community, or consolidate your family, put in place a lot of traditions and customs, but especially a lot of family meetings, a lot of times where children are together and they form these really strong and positive emotional bonds. And so the purpose of this episode is to show examples of parent leadership as applied to children 6 through 11 years of age, including developmental mile markers, so that I give you an example of the types of development that's going to occur, and some suggestions about how to organize your family community. And that family community is going to be much more important because children are confused about themselves as individuals, a lot of them, and they're also a lot are confused about where they want to spend their reference. Is their family their point reference group, or is their friends or somebody else, or don't they have one? Now, if you have one child or more than one who are between the ages of 6 and 11, you're having to make changes in order to address changes in your children and your family. Now, it's during this period of life for a child that they become more involved with institutions, political policies, social activities, and many diverse influences outside your family. And all these, and we have not included the important role of new and existing friends and acquaintances. Now, in our day, or my day, these children as a group have other kinds of experiences, but nowadays they have contact with the internet and its possibilities. And if your child is in a public or a private school, for instance, then the child will be involved outside the home with adults, media, social contacts, a lot of activities, educational programs, and so on. Well, what does this mean about your family? So in the research literature about children this particular age, and actually this is one of the less researched areas, adolescence gets a lot, early childhood gets a lot, even young adulthood gets more than middle childhood. And so for years, middle childhood has sort of been the mystery part of family development. But in recent years, researchers have been studying it from a variety of perspectives and have concluded that there are some things that are important to go on that are crucial to the rest of development, which is no surprise. We should understand and expect that. So the research now is beginning to show that there are some things that are really important during this period. Remember the idea of a critical or a sensitive period where brains grow rapidly and the children are more vulnerable to the conditions external to them? Well, for the first part of 6 through 11, this is less. But toward the end of this stage, 9, 10, 11, someone there, The media has changed this, and brains are developing faster in some ways and slower in others, which, depending on the amount of use of the technology, that causes some real problems or potentially causes problems. So, children in our culture who are between 6 and 11 years of age are usually in one of the great times of life. That is, if they're healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and morally. And if parents, families, and other social conditions work out well, then this is so good. They are busy increasing their involvement in activities, usually good ones, and at the same time, they are spending time learning about themselves and reflecting on what they learn. It's a lot like a girl who comes to believe that she's a good athlete and discovers that having friends is one of the most important parts of her life. So she will need to decide what to do. Or a boy who learns that playing the piano comes relatively easy to him, but feeling liked or disliked by friends weighs heavily in what he thinks is important. Now, in psychological terms, this period is a time when children individualize themselves or begin the process from others. And they also want to belong so much that they are discouraged if they are not included. So here it turns out, self-discovery and belonging are one of the important features of this period of time. So as we go along and we pay attention to the 5 kinds of development, please remember that each of these 5 areas offer opportunities for them to learn about themselves, but they also want to have 2 strong experiences. Individualize, so they have unique experiences and have some independence, but also make sure that every child feels like they belong and they have a great tie to their family. For many parents, the period of time between 6 and 11 of age is the period when some children begin to manifest the physical, mental, and emotional challenges or problems that beset some children. And if they exist, they often show up in a setting where children need to manage social, emotional, and mental requirements like public school or church activities. It is also the time when most children this age rise to their opportunities and embrace life, moving toward the health, enthusiasm, and competence. And it's also a time because children are spending more time with electronics and with people outside the home that a growing number are being adversely affected if that's excessive. Therefore, it will be important for you to know how to address potential problems as they are revealed during this period of time. There are things that take place in children's lives that most parents do not know, and therefore they're not prepared, nor do they know how to prepare kids for it. For example, it's during this period of life that a large percentage can feel their first genuine romantic or sexual attraction. Think of that. Age 10 is the average time when kids have their first romantic or sexual attraction to a member of the opposite sex. And the average age for this experience is around 10. And it may not be apparent what this implies, but today's parents would be well advised to conclude that still more boys than girls, but a growing percentage of girls, make their first contact with pornography during this period of their lives. Isn't that amazing? They're 11 years old and they have their first contact with pornography. We know this because we've spent time with young people. I've spent a lot of time with young people and adults whose addictions began at about 10 to 12 years of age. And these are reasons, in my opinion, why parents should concentrate on the positive growth of their children, organize themselves to promote it. So let's start off. What are the healthy development mile markers for children 6 to 11? Now, there's more than I'm going to give you, but I'm giving you a few of these so that you can see what it's like if you knew them, and then you can look at them and say, wow, that's what's happening to this boy, or that's what's happening to this girl, so I'm right on pace, or that's not happening. And while there might be some broad range where kids can do or not do something, it is also important for us to be aware when development is not taking place. So let's begin. What are the mile markers for physical development? Fascination with specific physical skills, whistling, spitting, skating, bicycling, sports, and so on. Increased gender interest, growing awareness of gender. Growth surges usually preceded by weight gain. A lot of 10 or 11 or 12-year-old girls chunk up, so do boys. They think they're going to be overweight, but they're just going to have a growth surge. They're more participation in physical activities, and they're interested in developing physical skills, running, jogging, sports, and so on. Well, what about mental development? Well, during this period of time, they identify and become aware of specific thought processes like strategies for remembering, solving problems, creating new ideas. They also increase their vocabulary, and they are discovering they are naturally interested in some things and not others, and they are better at learning some things than others. So this turns out to influence their work in school. They are also organizing their thought processes, becoming more strategic with how they learn. They use a variety of symbols, such as words or a mnemonic device, to increase information processing, that is, they learn faster. They're a little less impulsive in deciding generally, not always true for all of them. They match activities with their abilities and start selecting. If they're better at tennis than baseball, they'll move to tennis and so on. Well, what about social development? In social development, they can communicate or typically work at communicating with and adjusting to authority figures. They show ability to talk and listen as part of communication or the willingness to learn. They can meet new people, make friends, and perpetuate friendships. They recognize how to act and adapt their language and emotions to several different social situations. And when they don't do that, they're embarrassed and they understand the need to do that. They also work hard on fairness and loyalty and cooperation. They can talk and discuss as means of conflict resolution instead of fighting. They can learn that. And they can display social confidence in meeting people. Well, this is a good period of time for kids. Well, what about emotional development? Well, in emotional development, kids this age understand a broader range of positive and negative emotions. They feel and display more positive if they're healthy than negative, but quite often their emotions become more evident. So we're going to see them more expressed more intensely. They can do a better job or are working on regulating and controlling their expression of anger and frustration. They have more to do. In adolescence, they can talk about their feelings better if asked, and they can adapt their emotional response to different people. And they usually have developed or demonstrated, if they're taught, to show empathy and compassion for others. And if they're taught, they will learn to be optimistic most of the time. Well, what about moral development? Learning what's right and wrong and learning about moral laws and moral principles. First of all, they have a better understanding of what helps and harms themselves and other people, and they can learn that. They have a much stronger sense of right and wrong, and they have a sense of what honesty is, integrity is, or they're dishonest and they're trying to work on it. Some kids lie, and they have to be helped during this period of time. They also can demonstrate caring and acceptance of others, follow rules sometimes, but there are also times when they can be truly oppositional. They participate in communication with a variety of people, and they can describe their own thoughts and feelings much better. And they have learned a little bit more about sexual knowledge with the concepts of self-control and regulating oneself in order to avoid being hurt by it, which is a good thing, but that part would have to be taught in order for the kids to learn it. Okay, now that I've given you some idea about the mile markers for successful or healthy development, what are the threats the kids face in our society today? It's worthwhile exploring these in some detail. I'll mention them, but you ought to think about it and see whether or not you agree. First of all, there's a lot of disinformation, brainwashing, and indoctrination by schools and other active institutions. You have to watch out for that. Many parents seek medical help for depressed and anxious children at this age, so many kids are having a tougher time. There's early introduction to sex and sexual behavior and pornography, as I've mentioned, unless that's screened. And it's the adequate knowledge about sex and gender needs to be explained to them and taught so that they know what the correct form of it is and they're not worried when they hear from somebody else. Children this age still want to know, and they still pool their ignorance. They get together with others, start talking about it, and end up giving some ideas or things to people that are just simply untrue. So, in addition to all this, they are faced with confusing ideologies. Many schools, for example, children are presented conflicting and confusing ideas about race and gender roles, and there's a real issue going on in our society. So you may want to pay attention to that. The use of electronics isolates children from their parents, and if the use is excessive, it can delay brain growth and other problems. Excessive screen time and blue light that prevents production of melatonin can create sleeplessness for kids. Next is the content of movies on the internet and in theaters, which present violence, mistreatment of people by others, which shock the sensibilities of adults, let alone children, and they often develop an unrealistic way of thinking about people. Just amazing how many girls, for example, are now frightened of males because they've seen examples of male violence in some movie or on a TV show. Next is that their perception of reality, of divisiveness portrayed in social media. Now, what that means is that they're beginning to see that there are great divisions in society, and these divisions are marked by discrimination and rejection. So we're now seeing in elementary schools where kids differ with each other, they don't just say, oh, we have a different opinion. They have a difference of opinion and sometimes fight over it. It's amazing to me that we're in that situation and we're not paying enough attention to it. In addition to that, they are in contact with and involvement with peers who provide some opportunities for them to learn things we don't want them to know. So now you want to get together with the peers and find out what's going on. And then when positive ideologies are missing from a child's life, like religious faith, definition of a good person, or so on, then he or she is left with no specific values, and that means they're vulnerable to people who will make choices for them. It wouldn't be a good thing, but I can tell you that everybody would benefit from seeing children who have the problems that come from parents having failed to teach them a defined set of values that allow them to be constructive and positive. 30% of the girls in our society are molested, and there's a growing number of sexual abuse for boys. This is shocking to me, heartbreaking. There's a lot of adult indifference or inadequate mentoring, and so we see a lot of boys, increasing numbers of boys who become drifters. They're just drifting along and they don't have a sense of direction or commitment. It is also true that we have a lack of work ethic for some kids, a lack of skills and abilities that make it possible for children to manage even social and emotional demands of school. I cannot count, probably can't remember, but I can't count the number of kids I've seen professionally who have difficulty with their peers at school. And then lastly, the perceived and real multiple demands on children who feel vulnerable to this influence may lead to feelings of stress and pressure, which then lead to depression and anxiety. And so we're seeing depressed and anxious kids this age, which is just sort of blows my mind. And also kids who hurt themselves, kids who cut or injure themselves in some way to resolve the tension they feel. Well, okay, now what's the point of this? I'm going to reiterate that parent leadership requires that we know our children better than we used to think we knew them. And we're going to have to spend more time staying with them and talking and visiting about them. In addition to that, it is important for us to recognize that we must adapt, to find ways to adapt to individual children, to understand what's going on with him or her, to adapt to the age and stage of the family, and to the threats of children and the environment around them. And then lastly, we want to have the mile markers that are matched up as opposites to the threats so that you can see the two of them together. Here's a sample of healthy development, and here are the threats that may affect your children. Now, if you have knowledge of your children and you have those two sets of knowledge, you'll be prepared to look out at your kids and say, all right, here's what I think is best for this child and what is best for our family.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by firstanswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit firstanswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.